Hey guys. All right. Got back on the bed, my hair. So I took a later shower because you guys saw 4 bags today. um, from when I got up, just steady like piece by piece. So I got the four. I thought that's about as good as I would hope for. But I mean, so you guys know exactly everything I was up to today. And that's good timing because I was quite running out of um light there in the garage. Um um sorry, I was just trying to remember if it was the the clocks turning night or not last night. I forget. I think it wasn't. I guess should I expect it to be lighter? Maybe yeah, it is. Not light enough though at this point that the garage is like it was in midday. Yeah? It did turn? Okay. Listen, I never know what day it is, what time of year it is. All right. Oh, I just know that I love you and I'm looking forward to picking up where we left off on our book. Alice, 1962. I think this is when Barbara was born, like just born. So much mystery to get into. We still don't know what the heck's going on. Hi, John. Um, I I feel like there's gotta be something deeper about Carl. The fact that they emphasize his financial situation, how, like, he fell well, this was years ago, I guess, but, like and then going to the doctor, it was like, "No, I can't afford, like, emergency room." Where because the wealth of the, like, Van Lairs is, like, so different. So you gotta think around that time also, his son Scotty died. Was there a financial component? And then, um, I mean, yeah, okay, then the fact that the family was kind of distrustful of him already. I don't know. That's the only kind of motive that I'd see besides the fact that he didn't like the grandfather, I guess. So from there, let's see if we figure anything else out tonight. I like my iced coffees over here. I had one in me today. Spilled all over the floor. And I had some clothes near there, so that helped me decide. I guess I'm gonna get rid of these, I guess. Um mm. For 2 months after Barbara came home, things seemed better. A newborn in the house distracted her from her grief, which to that point had felt all consuming. She hadn't wanted Arthur, I don't think we have Salvation Army in my area. Maybe one of you can look it up, but I've never seen one. Uh, she hadn't wanted to get pregnant so quickly after Bear. It was Peter who insisted they try. We aren't getting younger, he said. Besides, he said, it will give you something to do. But something changed in the middle of Barbara's 3rd month when, in the early hours of the morning, Alice woke to the sound of a child calling for her. Conceptually, she understood that an infant of Barbara's age could not produce her mother's name. The name Bear gave her, Mama. She sat up in bed, held still, listened. There it was again, Mama. The nursery was dark and quiet. She tiptoed into it. The new nurse, Lorraine, was asleep on one side. Barbara was asleep on the other. For 2 minutes, Alice listened, standing in her nightgown in the center of the room, but there was only silence. She tiptoed out again, and as she was closing the door behind her, there it came. Mama. She pivoted, drifted back toward the nursery that used to be Bear's, put a hand on the doorknob. Alice, she jumped. At the end of the hallway was Peter, frowning. Go back to bed, he said. I wonder if this is giving us possibly a third person with motive, or, yeah, besides Carl, the grandfather. Alice having auditory hallucinations, common with schizophrenia. But, also, who knows, grief could produce that as well. It kept happening. She heard the voice each night. Sometimes it seemed to be coming from outside her window, sometimes from a lower floor, often from the nursery. Despite the night nurse, she slept very little. Peter, noticing this, brought in the family doctor, the same elderly physician who'd been treating the Van Lairs since Peter's father was in his 20s. Dr. Louise was his name, and the first pill he ever prescribed to Alice was meant to help her sleep. But the word broke through the pills, inflecting her dreams with dark and anxious images. Mama, Mama, came the call. She couldn't talk to Peter. She couldn't talk to her own family. Everyone in her life encouraged her to move on, to move forward on the assumption that Bear would not ever be found. But this, for Alice, was an impossible task. Until she had proof to the contrary, she allowed herself to imagine that her son might still exist in the world, someplace just out of sight, an actor in the wings who might at any moment walk on stage. Alice would wonder later whether this notion was what prevented her from fully embracing Barbara. Some part of her feared that Bear, wherever he was, in this world or the next, would sense some division in her motherly heart, would vanish or perish because of it. And so, each night, before she fell under the spell of Dr. Lewis's pills, she did not pray that the voice she heard would stop, but that it would come to her again and again, that Bear, in any form possible, would continue to visit her for the rest of her life. The problem began when Bear's visits got longer. Yeah. See, and I feel like a lot of extreme mental illness can really foster and it's like prime soil to nurture your illness in, because if the husband's not really noticing or caring or seeing and just trapped in a very small reality, it's like it has no other voice but its own, the illness. And yeah. Alice, 1962. It was a nice place and very discreet. These were the two words that everyone would use when describing it. Her parents were the ones to take her, presumably at the request of her husband and father-in-law. They were silent, all of them, for the 3-hour drive. Not even the radio played. It must be so hard, too, for people whose children go missing. Whether they're found or not in the years in between, what they go through. Yeah. When imagining the hospital, Alice had pictured something historic, something not dissimilar in appearance. In fact, from self-reliance. Set in nature, perhaps, a beautiful old building where she'd be given time to rest. Instead, the building on North Shore of Long Island was brand new, brutalist in style, made of yellowy concrete that darkened in the rain. The grounds were treeless and barren. On benches here and there, uniformed employees sat with charges who looked half asleep. Perhaps they had the wrong place, thought Alice. But no, there was a sign. The Dunwitty Institute, founded by a friend of Dr. Lewis who had recommended it. Thank you, Jerry. In the front seat, her father turned his head toward her mother, trying unsuccessfully to catch her eye. Surely they too saw what she saw. Certainly they'd understand that some mistake had been made. But her mother got out of the car without a word, and her father, after a beat, followed suit. Then he opened the back door for Alice. She had no roommate. At least there was that. She was granted this privilege, said a nurse, by virtue of her family connection. To Dr. Dunwitty. The nurse, a thin, frowning woman in her late middle age, had revealed this disapprovingly, clearing her throat after speaking all words as if ridding her mouth of their taste. No books were allowed, no television. The only permitted activities were puzzles of various kinds, jigsaw, crossword, acrostic. There was some theory behind this, no doubt. Idly, Alice wondered what it might be. What she hated most was that Bear didn't visit her here. The first night, she prayed that he would. Some company would have been nice. Instead, she was visited only by nightmares, in which she returned to those terrible first days of searching, in which she was thwarted over and over again by forces or people she couldn't control. When they were children, Delphine had called them can't get their dreams. Visions of missed trains and exams, traffic that stopped the car just before the boat departed. They'd happened to Alice all her life, but none of them compared to the one she had at the Dunwitty Institute. For 1 month, she had no visitors, and she was permitted no telephone calls. On the 31st day she was there, a nurse came into her room and retrieved her. Alice followed her, puzzled, down a long hallway she'd never seen before. At its end was a payphone. The nurse handed Alice a coin. Alice looked at it. Well, said the nurse, go ahead. But there was no one, she realized, that she wanted to call. She fed the coin into the payphone, dialed a number she remembered from childhood. On the other end, a woman's voice. Is Geraldine home? Alice asked, the name of a friend from Brearley to whom she had not spoken since she married Peter. A pause. May I ask who's speaking? This is Alice, Miss DeWitt, Alice Ward. Oh, Alice, said Miss DeWitt. Alice, I was sorry to hear. Swiftly, she hung up the phone. A week after that, she was told she had a visitor. If she had known who it was, she wouldn't have emerged from her room, but she didn't ask. This was how she came to find herself face to face across a table set for checkers with her sister Delphine. Alice turned to the nurse. I want to leave, she said. I don't want to be here. I'd like to go back to my room, please. What the nurse said, come now, that's your sister, and she's driven such a long way. Delphine smiled tightly, first at the nurse and then at Alice. I won't keep her long, nurse, said Delphine, using her grandest and airiest voice, and the nurse, obedient, practically bowed her way out of the room. For some minutes they sat in silence. The only way to survive this, thought Alice, was to imagine herself into a different world. And so, just as she had done in childhood, she closed her eyes, sitting quite upright, and left the earthly world. You're outside Bear's room, she thought. He'll wake up shortly. He'll call for you. Alice, said her sister. Mamma, thought Alice. Alice, can you hear me? Mamma, I'm sorry, said Delphine. Okay, part 5 is called Found. I don't know what to make of that last chapter. Like, did they give her a lobotomy? What's going on with, Judita, day 1. Judy stands outside, hands on hips, considering the cars in the parking area next to the house. Stately Cadillacs and Oldsmobiles, and Lincolns mostly. She tries to picture a blue Trans Am among them. It would have stood out. She turns in a full circle. 2 dark, angry ruts in the dirt driveway indicate a car backing out with vigor, then pulling off toward Route 29. She knows that the information she now has on John Paul McClellan Jr. is important. His late reentry into the house, his battered face, the disappearance this morning. Altogether, they make him, at a minimum, a person of interest. But as a junior investigator, she isn't authorized to do anything without her superior's approval. She checks her watch, wondering when Denny Hayes will return. After a few minutes, she walks back into the house. While she waits for Hayes, she knows she should continue to isolate and interview everyone else she can find. The lanky young people sprawled out on all the furniture in the great room are the people she is least eager to speak to. They look somehow like they should be feeding one another grapes, like young gods in their own minds at least. Still, she approaches them one after another, asks them politely if they'll speak with her, and then brings them into an empty sunroom she found while walking the house. There she asked them her standard questions: name, age, occupation, primary place of residence, to which every one of them replies Manhattan or Los Angeles. The last person she interviews is a thin, severe-looking 23-year-old, the only one who tells Judy she has been staying in the main house itself, as opposed to an outbuilding. Her name, she says, is Marnie McClellan. Upon hearing the girl's last name, Judy pauses, goes still for a moment. Occupation, she says, gallerist. Judy doesn't know the word. She writes it down and tells herself she'll look it up later. Relationship to the Van Lairs, she says. Goddaughter. Are you close? Marnie McClellan lifts her chin. Extremely. Judy holds her pen over her notepad. She must, she knows, tread carefully here. She asks the girl the same set of questions she's asked everyone else and gets similar answers. She was at the party. She stayed up late. There was a good deal of noise, a good deal of drinking. She went to bed at 4 this morning. She knows Barbara well. The families have spent a good deal of time together, have vacation together too, but she has no theories about where the girl might be now. How would you describe Barbara? Oh, miserable, says the girl. Just a really unhappy person. Judy nods. In her notepad, she writes, dislikes B. How so, she says. Well, she's always given her family a really hard time. I know she's gotten into trouble at school. She's supposed to be kind of fast for her age and wears clothes and makeup that are. Marnie pauses here, summoning up the words to describe them. They're terrible. All black everything, dark rings around her eyes, spikes in her earlobes. Really upsetting, if you ask me. The product of a disturbed mind. Oh, thank you, Rob. A rose. Judy hasn't heard this before about Barbara. She writes B, dressed oddly. At last, Judy works around to the questions she's been waiting to ask. Are the other members of your family staying on the grounds as well? Yes. Can you tell me their full names? Why? Just trying to put together a list of all the guests to make sure I've covered all my bases before my boss gets back, Judy adds, smiling deferentially. Marnie is very still. My father, she says, is John Paul McClellan Sr. My mother is Nancy McClellan. Judy looks at her. Occupations. My mother's a homemaker, says Marnie. My father is a business partner of the Van Lairs. A banker, says Judy. An attorney. He represents the family and the bank. Judy nods, writing, then asks with forced calm, do you have any siblings? My brother is John Paul McClellan Jr. Occupation? Marnie scoffs, then recovers herself. Not much, she says. He graduated from college last year. He'll take over the bank one day if he ever gets his act together. Judy considers this. What makes you think that? Marnie looks at her as if she's dumb. The Van Lairs don't have a boy, not anymore anyway, but we do. I see, says Judy, writing this down. And do you know where I might find them? Who? The other members of your family, your parents and brother. I have no idea, says Marnie after a pause. Have you seen them this morning? Marnie hesitates for a moment. I've only seen my father, she says, but I don't know where he is now. 5 minutes later, Judy walks back out through the main entrance to the house, the one with the black fly knocker. She looks down the hill toward the camp. The mounting evidence against John Paul McClellan Jr. has become too much to ignore. A lone state trooper stands on the lawn. Excuse me, she says. Has Captain La Rochelle arrived yet? He looks at her blankly. I'm Investigator Luptak, she says. I was told the captain will be arriving soon to speak to the family. He shakes his head. Nope, there's a couple more BCI guys down there, but no captain yet. Judy thanks him. Then, with purpose, she walks back into the kitchen of Self-Reliance, where she has seen a telephone on the wall. Glancing over each shoulder, she lifts the receiver, dials into the station, and requests a bolo. All officers in the region will be informed over the radios that they should be on the lookout for a blue Trans Am. This is too important to wait for Denny Hayes' return. If she's made a wrong assessment, she'll deal with the consequences later. Having interviewed everyone she can find at the house, Judy walks back out to the front and perches for a moment on the edge of an Adirondack chair, scribbling frantically in her notebook. She wants to capture all the exact words and phrases she can remember. From some distance away, she hears someone calling, Ma'am? She doesn't look up. Ma'am? The voice says again, closer this time. She hears footsteps, turns. Approaching her is an Encon Ranger, 50-something, bearded, a few steps behind him, a giant girl wearing a towel around her shoulders. She looks taller than Judy by a head, taller even than the Encon Ranger, who himself is not a small man. Behind the two of them, a couple follows, a man in his 50s and a woman who looks about Judy's age. Is she the girl's sister? I'm looking for someone from the BCI, the ranger asks. Judy looks down at herself, at her suit, which clearly separates her from the troopers, the rangers, the guests. That's me, says Judy, finally, Investigator Luptak. The girl with him looks shaky, reaching the line of Adirondack chairs at the front of the house. She sits down hard in one, puts her elbows on her knees. This is Tracy Jewell, he says. She was Barbara Van Lair's bunkmate. She's got a few things she'd like to share with you. Next chapter, Tracy, day 1. Tracy sits in a chair on the lawn, drinking a glass of water, eating a sandwich someone has brought to her. Next to her is a woman police officer, the first one Tracy has ever met or ever seen. At least she thinks this woman is a police officer. She wears no uniform, only a suit. She looks young, but her notepad and pen give her an air of authority. She is waiting silently for Tracy to speak. What did you say? Tracy asked. The person you met in the woods. Can you give us any details? Oh, Tracy says, not really. Do you know if it was a man or a woman? I think it was a man, says Tracy, but I'm not sure. I should wear glasses, but I don't. She thinks. It had gray hair, she adds. Did the person say anything to you? Tracy shakes her head. It didn't talk. It just waved at me, led me out of the woods. The woman nods, scribbles quickly on her notepad. Are they trying to find the person now, says Tracy. The Rangers. I think they probably are, says the woman. It was trying to help me, says Tracy. Whoever it was. I'm sure you're right, says the woman. We'll just wait to have a conversation with the person. See if they've seen anything we should know about. She pauses. Tracy, she says, why did you go into the woods to begin with? Tracy is silent. Would you like to share that with me? Tracy takes a bite, chews, drinks water. She pulls the towel she is wearing more tightly around herself. Then, breaking a promise to Barbara, keeping a promise to herself, she tells Investigator Leptak why it was that Barbara went into the woods. Every night, Investigator Leptak says, holding her gaze, Barbara left every night? Almost, says Tracy, except once when she was injured, and always to the observer's cabin. That's what she said, but she never said who her boyfriend was. Tracy shakes her head. No. Investigator Leptak nods. Thank you, Tracy, she says. That's very helpful. Is there anything else you think might be helpful? Did she ever mention anything about her relationship with her family? Tracy hesitates. Did she get along with her parents? Tracy shakes her head. No, she says softly. Any idea why? I guess they were strict with her. Her father was anyway. Her mother wasn't very involved. Investigator Leptak nods. And do you know if anything happened recently that might have frightened Barbara or made her upset or made her angry? Tracy thinks. She's about to say no. Barbara has never been specific in her complaints about her family. But then she remembers something. Yes, she says, they painted her walls. Investigator Leptak's expression changes. Here at the house? Yes. Her mother had them painted pink. And why did that upset her? I don't know, says Tracy. Maybe she didn't like the color. Next chapter, Judita, day 1. 20 minutes later, after the girl has been released into the care of the couple Judy has determined to be her father and his girlfriend, Judy stands in the main house, in the hallway outside the pink room. Considering its door, she could open it, she thinks. No one's inside. But she isn't certain what the consequences of this action would be. And so she hovers there for a while, waiting. She hears footsteps at the end of the hallway. A side door opens, and through it walk a man and a woman. The man is tall, elegant, his dark hair streaked with silver. The woman, who comes second, is so incredibly thin that she looks ill. The man pauses, stares at Judy for a moment. He is 10 yards away. Then he shakes his head a bit, inscrutably. and ushers the woman into one of the bedrooms off the hall. Are these the parents, Mr. and Miss Van Laer? When the man comes out, he is alone, and he leaves through the same door without glancing in her direction. Judy, someone says, and she jumps. It's Denny Hayes. Come on, says Hayes. I've been looking for you. Captain just got here. He's about to start a briefing down at the camp. You can fill me in on your morning while we walk. He takes off. Judy follows, trotting slightly to keep up. She leads with the most important facts: that Barbara's bunkmate said she had a boyfriend, that she was sneaking out each night to see him at the observer's cabin at the top of Hunt Mountain. She tells him about the painted bedroom walls and that Barbara was upset over them. Next, she tells him what she's learned about John Paul McClellan, the bloody face, the late return, the disappearance of him and his blue Trans Am. She saves for last the fact that she has already put out a bolo for the car. For a moment, Denny stops and turns toward her, and Judy is afraid that he'll chastise her for not seeking permission from a higher up. But instead, he says, Judy, you're actually doing really good work here. Judy frowns. The actually, she thinks, was unnecessary, but she'll take it. Speak up in the captain's briefing, okay? Says Denny Hayes. Then, without waiting for a response, he keeps walking. The command post, Judy learns, has been moved from the backstage area of the Great Hall to the director's cabin on La Rochelle's orders. They'll need near constant access to a telephone. This means that T.J. Hewitt, the director, who lives there, has been displaced to an empty room in the staff quarters. At 5 p.m, inside the director's cabin, Captain La Rochelle now stands at attention in front of the longest wall. He's an imposing man, military haircut, very upright posture. Around him, a dozen investigators sit or stand. Half are from B tour, staying late. The other are C tour investigators, just arriving for their shift. Judy and Hayes arrive last, as La Rochelle, consulting his notes, begins to speak. Persons of interest so far, he says, and with his fingers he ticks them off. John Paul McClellan Jr., godson of the Van Laer family, came home last night with a bloody face, nowhere to be found this morning. Still at large, bolo's been issued. Judy is startled. She is still figuring out how information gets transmitted from person to person in the BCI. She isn't sure how Captain La Rochelle knows this already. He continues, Louise Donahue, Barbara's counselor, currently in custody on an unrelated charge, but not sure how long we can keep her there. He checks his notes, Investigator Lowry working that lead. He pauses. Unknown person seems to be roaming the woods near the estate, he says. According to a girl named Tracy Jewell, Barbara's bunkmate, we have no description on this person other than that he is tall, because Tracy wasn't wearing her glasses. But we haven't spotted anybody yet, nor have we spotted any sign of Barbara herself in the nearby woods. The hounds did pick up a scent on her, but it seems they may have been trailing a path she took on a different organized outing several days ago. He looks up. So basically, we've gotten nowhere near where we need to be 9 hours into this search. Another investigator speaks up. Sir, have the parents said anything notable? Not really, says La Rochelle. I spoke to Miss Van Laer at length just now. He describes Barbara as unhappy and troubled. Or Mr. Van Laer. His suspicion is that she's a runaway, but he didn't have any idea where she might have gone. Any reason to suspect him? Not that I'm aware of at this juncture, says La Rochelle, but obviously we'll be watching him closely. He points to one of the investigators who's just arrived for a sea tour. That means you, he says. You're in charge of keeping an eye on the parents overnight. A beat of silence. Then the same investigator who asked about the parents speaks again. Sir, he says, do you find it suspicious at all that the father wouldn't speak to any of us, that he wanted to wait for you? La Rochelle considers this. I wouldn't say it's suspicious necessarily, he says. I work with them closely on their son's case. Could just be there's a level of trust there. To Judy, this sounds dubious, but as the newest investigator in the room, she has no intention of saying so. What else do you have for me? Says La Rochelle, and Hayes elbows her gently. Judy clears her throat, raises her hand. Then she tells La Rochelle about what Tracy Jewell said. The boyfriend, the overnight meetings at the observer's cabin, the painted walls. La Rochelle raises his eyebrows. Anyone else heard anything about a boyfriend? Around the room, heads shake. He points to one investigator. You, find a ranger. Ask them if they've been to the observer's cabin yet. If not, get them moving. He pauses. Do we know where Barbara Van Laer was in school? An investigator raises his hand. Emily Grange, down near Latham. You, says La Rochelle to the investigator. Head there. Get numbers from them for Barbara's friends. Ask about a boyfriend. You, says La Rochelle, pointing to an investigator coming on to sea tour who has half a sandwich hanging from his mouth. Head for the Van Laer's house in Albany. Check Barbara's room there for anything relevant. Bring back Polaroids if you can. He pauses. Questions. A moment of stillness, and then one hand goes up. From the edge of the room, it's an investigator Judy hadn't noticed until now, perhaps the oldest person in the room. Is it worth considering Jacob Sluter? A general shift in atmosphere in the room. For a moment, there's a standoff. La Rochelle seems to be waiting for the investigator to explain himself, to offer excuses or some rationale. He doesn't. La Rochelle folds his arms. It's possible, I guess, he says, him being on the loose, but to me that seems less likely than other explanations, says La Rochelle. The investigator nods, though his expression signifies that he's not completely satisfied. Could he have been the unknown person in the woods, the one who led the Jewel girl toward the house? La Rochelle frowns. Now, let's think about that, he says. Convicted sexual offender and murderer sees a girl alone and lost in the woods. Is he going to lead her to safety, or is he going to seize upon the opportunity to do what he's done in the past? The old investigator says nothing. The two men regard each other as if sending silent messages to one another that the rest of the room can't read. I'm not saying it's out of the question, says La Rochelle. I'm just saying when you hear hoofbeats, don't look for a zebra. Judita, day 1. It's almost 6 o'clock at the end of their first day on the preserve. To Judy, this math doesn't compute. She feels as if she's been there for a year. Hayes is driving north to BCI headquarters at Ray Brook. After that, she'll start the long drive to Schenectady. The thought makes her want to cry. Tired? Says Hayes. A little. Get ready, says Hayes, because case like this, you'll be working around the clock. He rolls down the window, shakes a pack of cigarettes in his hand, offering one to Judy, who declines. Don't smoke? No. That's good, says Hayes. My old man died from it, I think. He didn't call it cancer, but he sure died coughing. He pulls from it, blows a plume of smoke sideways out the open window. I only smoke in the car. That's my compromise with myself. Judy gives a weak laugh. just enough to demonstrate that she's been listening. Can I ask you something? Says Hayes, and Judy tenses, expecting something personal. It will be a very long time before Judy feels at ease enough around her colleagues to divulge anything at all about her family or her history. But when Hayes continues, it's benign. Why'd you get into police work? She considers her options. I wanted to help people sounds trite. I thought it sounded interesting, too vague. At last, surprising herself, she tells the truth. The Mod Squad, says Judy. Says Hayes, as if he hasn't heard. The Mod Squad, says Judy. It was my favorite show. Hayes starts laughing, keeps laughing until he coughs, flicks his cigarette out the window. I'll be damned, he says. First time I ever heard that one. Judy grins. The Mod Squad, says Hayes, laughing and laughing until at last easy silence descends on the car, which is when the radio crackles to life. John Paul McClellan in his blue Trans Am has been spotted and detained. He's on the side of the thruway 10 miles south. Denny Hayes glances at his watch. 6 o'clock, he says. We're off. We could go home. He looks at her. Do you want to? Judy shakes her head. Hayes radios back, pops his magnetic light onto the roof, careens over the grassy median, and reverses direction. When they arrive, the state trooper who pulled him over has John Paul McClellan handcuffed. He's sitting on the grass near his car. He's been punched several times from the look of his swollen lips, his black eye. The trooper fills them in. McClellan is obviously drunk, he says. In fact, that was the first thing he noticed. He would have pulled him over anyway, even without the bolo. He failed his field sobriety test resoundingly. He's all yours, says the trooper. I've been at a restaurant, says McClellan from the ground. Presumably, restaurant means bar. The smell of the liquor on his breath is evident from several feet away, as is the smell of marijuana. Hayes opens the passenger door, begins a search. You can't do that, says McClellan. I haven't authorized the search. Unfortunately for you, says Hayes, voice strained and muffled as he bends low into the car. By virtue of the fact that the scent of an illegal substance is discernible from within your vehicle, I do have the right to search it. In quick succession, Hayes finds a roach clip, 2 crushed cans of Genesee, and what appears to be a residue from cocaine at the center console. And he hasn't even gotten to the trunk. Based on this evidence, along with McClellan's clear intoxication, he has placed McClellan under arrest. Judy, meanwhile, takes his license and registration back to the unmarked car and radios both over to Ray Brooke. From the driver's seat, while waiting for the operator to come through, she watches McClellan steadily. He's sniffing, his mouth and face moving in strange ways. At first, she attributes this to the coke. She's never done it herself, but she saw people in high school do it. Boys, mainly, other jocks. But as McClellan turns his face upward toward the sun, she realizes he is crying. Hayes has moved to the trunk now. He is opening it. Hayes' back is to her. With gloved hands, he's removing an improbable number of objects from the small trunk, placing each one carefully on the ground. Golf club, duffel bag, satchel, book, shoe. Last, Hayes removes a paper bag. McClellan isn't looking up, Judy sees. He's staring hard at the ground. The color of the bag, which Hayes is handling carefully, looks strange, not like most paper bags Judy has seen before. And then she realizes the bottom of it is darker than it should be. Judy, keeping a close eye on McClellan to ensure he is still sitting, gets out of the car and walks toward Hayes, who is now squatting on the ground, looking inside the bag as she approaches. He begins lifting each object out in turn, using two gloved fingers to do so. Oh, suspicious. Oh, thank you, Jerry. No, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Oh, the flowers. I miss the road trips in the. Guys, can you let me know if I've ever done a road trip in the Mustang in this channel? Let alone ever. Unless you're the person that had my car for the last few months and did thousands and thousands of dollars of damage to it, then maybe you are missing it. Otherwise, I don't understand. Do you mean it to me or yourself? Hmm. Uh, I went to the grocery store. Um, yeah, it can't possibly mean me. What does that mean? I haven't even had the car that long. Okay? You're definitely talking about someone else. Okay. What's that? Mhm. Underwear, shorts, a t-shirt, small, white, blue. It's a uniform, covered by the looks of it in blood. Oh, ooh. Well, it could have been, I don't know, from the fight. Judy looks at McClellan. His head is still lowered. She looks at Denny Hayes, who's saying something Judy can't hear. Shit, shit. His face looks drained of color. For all his bravado, he seems unprepared for this. He's a father, Judy remembers. All other things aside, he has his own children. All three of them are silent on the ride to the station until Denny talks. Did you kill her? He says. And the noise of the question is like a gun going off. Judy can hear the air moving around the car in its wake. She glances at McClellan in the rear view. He's looking out the window, his expression inscrutable. For a time, she thinks he won't speak at all until he does. I invoke my right against self-incrimination, he says. Spoken, she thinks, like the son of a lawyer. At Ray Brook, they process him quickly and put him in a holding cell. He's given one phone call. Judy has no doubt who'll be the other end. Sure enough, from his mouth comes a quivering, Dad? And then the hand goes up over the brow, hiding what Judy knows will be self-pitying tears. Nothing he says is surprising. He got in trouble. He needs help. He needs his father to come to him. Hayes enters the room, says Judy, go home. Says Judy, go home. It's 8 o'clock now. She won't reach Schenectady until after 10. So there's like a bloody uniform that we know of that you put in a bag. Underwear, no wait. Underwear, shorts, a t-shirt that's small, white, and blue. I guess it could be his, because I'm like, or no, it's a uniform covered in blood. What I mean is what they say about Barbara is that she's not a small girl. So if it's a small white blue shirt, unless that's John's, and then you know if they were like female underwear or like male underwear, because those can look a bit different. I don't know if you know this, but males and females, they got different genitalias. Different, yeah. Although I know at least one of you that has a thong. Okay. Louise, day one. Louise in jail with her boyfriend. It's nearly midnight. Louise has been in a holding cell for 10 hours. She's been given water, but nothing to eat. She feels lightheaded, ill. She wishes for outside air. She eyes a cup of now cold coffee, which she normally doesn't drink, and takes a sip. Finally, there's a brusque knock at the door. Someone opens it without waiting for a response. It's a man, 50, wearing thick glasses and a sweater vest over his brown tie. He looks like an English professor, thinks Louise. He's carrying a Coke in his hand. The only sign that he works in law enforcement comes in the form of a badge. He sits down opposite Louise, crosses one leg over the other. She braces herself. She will simply tell him the truth. She's decided. She was out overnight last night, but so was Annabelle. The drugs in the bag are Annabelle's, not hers. The man does not introduce himself, but he takes a sip of his Coke and begins. Something about his aspect and outfit makes her expect kindness from him, but his tone is stern. What's your relation to John Paul McClellan? He says. He looks directly at her. He has no notepad in which to record her answers. The question throws her off. This wasn't what she was expecting to discuss. I'm his fiancée, says Louise automatically. We're engaged. We've been together 4 years. Huh, says the man. She waits, guarded for more, willing herself into silence. That's not what he said about you, the man says. Louise moves a little in her chair. Don't ask, she tells herself. Louise, don't ask, but she can't help herself. What do you mean? The man excavates a speck of dirt from beneath a thumbnail. He sniffs, and his thick rimmed glasses slide slightly down his nose. He said you two used to sleep together, the man says. You know, a while ago. It's over now, he says, but you're still hung up on him. It's horseshit, says Louise, without thinking. Where's your ring? Louise flushes. This has always been a point. He says he wants to get her a nice one, something beautiful. I'm wearing it today, says Louise. I don't wear it at camp. Look, I don't know what's true, says the man. That's just what he said. Just tell me. Louise looks at him sideways. What's your name? She says. The investigator blinks. You know mine, she says. What's yours? Lowry. I'm not supposed to be talking to you, Lowry, she says. Who gave you that advice? Silent. Louise reminds herself, say nothing. For a minute, the two of them sit without speaking. The man leans back in his chair, hands behind his head, comfortable. He looks up and out the one high window in the room. The professional attire thinks Louise is a ruse, a trick designed to disarm suspects. This man is like every other cop she's ever met. Suddenly, Louise's stomach grumbles so loudly that the sound fills the room. Hungry, says the man, a statement, not a question. He stands, walks into the other room, returns with an apple and a little knife. He pares the apple from its skin and then slices it, and then hands her pieces one at a time, which she doesn't decline. Why are you asking me about John Paul? She says, after the apple's nearly gone. You can't figure it out? Louise says nothing. You know why you're here, right? The man says, trying again, but again, Louise says nothing. You're being held right now for a minor crime. We're getting a bail hearing scheduled as we speak. That'll happen tomorrow, probably, at the earliest, but you're here for another reason, too. Silence. She waits. The man watches her, measured. She does not like his expression. He believes her to be impressionable, credulous, a local who never left home. If he only knew, she thinks, if he only knew the restaurants she's gone to with John Paul, the movies she's seen, the book she's read on John Paul's recommendation, and on account of her own curiosity. I'm different from what you think, she wants to tell him, but Denny's warning, don't talk without a lawyer, remains at the front of her mind. The man leans forward. We know, he says, that you know what happened to Barbara Van Laer. It catches her off guard. I don't, says Louise, before she can stop herself. But for some reason, even to her, the words sound false, high-pitched, a note of complaint in their intonation. That's different too, says the man. Then what? Then what your boyfriend said. John Paul, I mean, you know what, Louise? Why did you pick this guy? Next chapter, Alice, August 1975. Okay, this is a new one, August 1975. So this is the next month, right? Yeah. This thought Alice was what self-reliance had been built for. At 10 in the morning, she stood in the center of the great room and turned in a slow circle as, all around her, the house was resurrected. They had not held a party, the Black Fly goodbye, or any other since Bear's disappearance, but the house's 100th anniversary seemed to Peter to be an auspicious occasion to restart the tradition. Good for business, he said. He had several potential clients he wanted to invite. The obstacle was the amount of work that had to be done. Most of Self-Reliance's bedrooms had been closed for longer than Barbara had been alive. Now they were being unsealed, the dust coverings pulled from the furniture, the windows open, cut flowers were driven up from the florist they used in Albany. Wildflowers at Peter's command, bunches of wood sorrel and dewdrops, and Jack in the pulpits, in vases all over the house, on nightstands in every bedroom. Peter had the sofa and chairs in the great room reupholstered and had bought new furniture too. 3 dozen Adirondack chairs, locally made, now stood at attention in a neat semicircle on the lawn leading down to Lake Joan. The old ones, splintered and ancient, had been scrapped for firewood by someone on staff. It wasn't only the house that had been remade. For the past weeks, ever since Barbara's departure for camp, Alice had been attending to herself, her physical person, for the first time in years. It was a welcome turn. This party and its planning had reignited some fundamental part of herself. Her character. Certainly, she had never let herself go, not all the way, but she had also not been quite as careful with her clothing, her skin, her nails. She used to wear her hair in a sort of voluminous bob that ended at the nape of her neck. Very chic, she had always been told, but after Bear's disappearance, she had stopped going to her normal hairdresser, not wanting to answer questions again and again. Her hair had grown long, shamefully so. To hide its length, she pinned it into a low twist. A week after Barbara's departure for Camp Emerson, she had asked one of the staff to drive her down to Albany for a hair appointment. She returned with her hair in a long straight sheet down her back, freshly dyed to conceal the gray at her temples. In her hand was a bag from Whitney's, and inside it were 7 new outfits, including 2 miniskirts and a bikini. The salesgirl, impossibly young, had egged her on. "You've got the figure, after all," she said. Now, it was Saturday morning, the day the party was set to begin, and Alice stood before her closet, deciding which new outfit to choose. "Miss Van Laer," someone said. She turned. It was a young man she did not at first recognize. One of the temporary staff Peter had hired, she guessed. He was wearing a uniform anyway. "What is it?" "Someone at the front door," the boy said. "A guest?" Alice asked, horrified. Surely not yet, she thought. It was only 11 in the morning. The guests were not due until late afternoon. I'm not sure, said the boy. It's a couple. There, he hedged. And just then, Alice heard her mother's voice, familiar and terrifying all at once, impatient and out of sorts. Alice blinked, frozen. She was in no way ready for their arrival. Thank you, said to the boy, who retreated, and then, with reluctance, Alice pulled from her closet a mock turtleneck and a corduroy miniskirt and put them both on. Good heavens, Alice, said her mother in the great room. She took Alice in with a sweep of her eyes, from top to bottom, her flat ironed hair, her short skirt, her bare legs and feet, and then she pronounced, "You're gaunt." It was, and was not, an insult. Mother, said Alice, you're early. Well, I thought you'd need the help, said her mother, casting her gaze around the room, her implication clear. At times, Alice was impressed by the creativity of her mother's criticisms, the poetry of the language she used to describe all that she found lacking in the world around her. A different sort of daughter would have distanced herself from her mother long ago, or at least made the decision to laugh about it all. But at more than 40 years old, Alice, still embarrassingly, she realized, strove to successfully anticipate the ward off the complaints that emanated from her. A deluge of observations designed to sound neutral, each more cutting than the last. You go off and get ready, said Miss Ward. I'll direct the others. Alice froze, ordered herself to say, I am ready. Thank you, Mother, she said instead, and avoided meeting her father's gaze. If she did, she might have cried, for she knew he would be looking at her with something like pity. Why did she let it all bother her at this point in her life? Peter had been telling her for years. Well, never mind what he said. He was part of the problem. Alice retreated down the hallway, self-conscious now about her body, her bare legs. She could feel her mother's gaze still burning into her. In the bedroom, she opened her closet door and stood there for too long, staring at, but not processing, the visual field before her. Colors were there and textures and garments of various lengths. And then, above the clothing rack, another swath of fabric drew her attention, and she reached for it. During Alice's time away, the only term that was ever used to describe her stay at the Dunwitty Institute, Dr. Lewis had urged the rest of the Van Layers to remove all hints of bear from their Albany house and from self-reliance too. And so his 2 rooms had been stripped to the studs. The walls, once covered to Bear's delight in wallpaper designed to look like maps of the world, had been painted white, his clothing gone, his toys and books. This, Dr. Lewis said, was the way to let Alice heal. And in the Van Layer household, the advice of Dr. Lewis, a friend of Peter II's from his Yale days, was taken. But there was one possession of Bear's that they had not seen. When Bear was born, someone had given her a blanket for him, blue with a silk ribbon trim in a moon and star pattern. As he grew, he was rarely without it. But when, at 4, he was still trailing it about the house, Peter had issued a command that it be taken from him. And Alice had complied, had kept it hidden from him here on the shelf in her closet, though the boy had wept pitifully for it each bedtime for a week. When Alice returned from her time away to find all of Bear's artifacts removed from the house, she had known enough to mask her dismay. She would rather be there in Bearless home than in that other place again. As soon as she was unmonitored, she had retired to her room and threw open the door to the closet. And there it was, the blanket she had hidden from him so long ago. Now, Alice held the blanket to her face, trailed over her cheek, its frayed edges, which Bear had a habit of tapping lightly with his fingers. She wouldn't change her outfit, she decided. She would say nothing to her mother. She simply wouldn't change. She draped the blanket over her face. She lay on her bed like that for a time. She had none of Dr. Lewis's pills since her trip to Albany. She had been distracted by preparations for the festivities. Something to do for once, thought Alice. It had not occurred to her during all of that planning to have a very bad day. Someplace else in the house, she heard her mother issuing commands. There, she was saying, there, no, yes, no. Mechanically, Alice's right hand went to her bedside table and pulled open its drawer, and she felt the comforting curve of the bottle inside and heard the comforting rattle of the pills. And into her mouth she took one of them, and then two of them, and then three, and then four. She bit down on them and chewed, and then she put Bear's blanket back over her face, a shroud, she thought, a pall, and then laughed a bit to herself. When she opened her eyes, she heard voices on the lawn, many of them. She tried to sit up, but could not. There was darkness above and around her. As a child, she had avoided naps, for waking from them caused in her a sort of supernatural despair. Bear, too, had been like this. The only time he was bleary was after his afternoon rest. She felt it now, despite the heat of the afternoon. She pulled the covers around herself. After a minute or an hour, she rose. Then the nightstand, then the drawer, then the pills, two more, three. She walked with a hand on the wall. She felt her way down the hallway and into the kitchen, where she fumbled in the cabinet for a glass, and then ran water from the sink. It came from a well and tasted sweetly of the earth. A small trickle of liquid escaped the side of her mouth, and she ran a hand below her chin to catch it. And then she noticed a movement. In her peripheral vision, a hesitant human form. She turned. The new cook, the girl from town, the nameless one. What? Said Alice. Nothing. Nothing, ma'am, said Alice. But the girl only blinked at her. The cabinets, the wall, the two steps up into the great room. Careful, careful. The back of the sofa, the side of the central fireplace, pleasingly rough. She stopped short at the glass door that led to the lawn. There before her were her guests. Hers too, she thought, not just Peter's. Now they had begun without her. No one had thought to rouse her, not even her own husband. Outside, in the sun, all of them were tipping their glasses back, tipping their heads back in merriment. She scanned the crowd for Peter and spotted him speaking with the McClellans, husband, wife, daughter, son. Each one thought Alice terrible in a different way. She moved as if to place a hand on the sliding glass door, but found it was open instead. And so she tipped forward through it, which caused a woman 10 feet in front of her to shriek her name gladly, Alice, and then pause. The crowd, having heard this greeting, turned and then hushed. Alice was realizing something. There were too many pills inside her. After a week of not taking any, especially after a day of not eating, she put a hand to her hair and found it out of order, great strands of it hanging down in front of her ears. She put a hand to her outfit, her short skirt, and found it up too high around her waist. Her eyes swam toward Peter's. He was too far from her. He was saying something to the McClellans, something about her. She could see him moving his mouth. The McClellan boy, John Paul Jr., had become a man. He'd taken over the business, it was said, and she could see it. He already had the air that all these men had, the feeling he was owed something, everything. Through the haze of her intoxication, she had a sense of deja vu, a feeling of living a particular series of scenes for the second time in her life. She put a hand to her face to make certain she was intact. Then she retreated back into the house, into its shade, back down the hallway toward Bear's room, unstoppably, where she lay on the bed that was no longer her son's, where she curled into another tight arrangement of bones and flesh, where, several hours later, two guests would find her deeply asleep. Outside, she heard again the voices of her guests, rising slowly into mirth once more. The party would go on without her. Next chapter, Louise, day 1. Louise feels ill. I don't believe you, she says over and over. That's up to you, says the detective, Lowry. She has the feeling she has already said things to him that she shouldn't have said. But if there's one thing that sets her off, it's being lied on. All her life, people have been telling lies about her. Today, it's happened twice already. First Annabelle, now this. Her face is hot with fury, with the injustice of it all. She's rankled. She can't shut up. You're lying, she says, her heart racing. Nope, says Lowry, with a sort of calm assurance that makes her want to reach across the table and, when did it start? Says Lowry. Fuck you, says Louise. All right, says Lowry. You can sit a while longer. I got no other place to be. John Paul, says Lowry, has been found with a bag of Barbara's clothing. Bloody, he added, holding Louise's gaze as he said the word. He had no idea what was in the bag, said the detective, but he said Louise had asked him to get rid of it for her. You know what that reminds me of, said the detective. The other bag you asked someone to get rid of for you earlier today. Now, Louise looks back at him steadily, her face flushed with anger. She tries and fails to keep her voice level. Listen to me, she says. I had nothing to do with either one of those bags. I knew about Annabelle's, but that was her stuff in it, not mine. Lowry assesses her. I get it, he says. Barbara looked a lot older than 13. Louise's stomach turns. She used to hear this sentiment expressed a lot about herself. No, she does not, she says, careful to use the present tense, to dodge what she assumes is the grammatical trap the detective has laid for her. She looks like a 13-year-old who wears black eyeliner. She looks like a kid. Lowry nods. I guess I could see that too, he says. That makes sense, actually. She doesn't take the bait. He tries again. How long have you known Lee Howson? She's silent. She pictures Lee in his apron, grinning at her from the commissary kitchen. Wonders where he is right now. It was his idea, right? Says Lowry. He asked you to bring her to him. The absurdity of the accusation riles her. But she understands in a new way that Denny Hayes was correct when he told her to ask for a lawyer, that nothing she says now will serve her. What do you have me here for? Says Louise finally. Her hunger has become nausea. Lowry looks at her, surprised. You can't keep me here, can you? Says Louise. Can't I leave? Nope, says Lowry, shaking his head. Technically, you're being charged with possession of a controlled substance, he says. That's a lie, too, says Louise. Well, we don't know that yet. All we know is that the charge has been laid on you. So until bail is set for that charge and you pay it, you're with us. But that's not really why you're keeping me in here, says Louise. You already told me that. Lowry smiles. Did I? He says. Louise says nothing. Louise, says Lowry, if you're done talking to us, that's fine. That's your right. But hear me out. I'm going to tell you something and that I think might help you. He pauses, sips his Coke. From the inner pocket of his jacket, he produces a plastic-wrapped oatmeal raisin cookie, softened in the heat, which he slowly removes from its packaging. dips into his coffee, and begins to eat. Maximum sentence for possession of a controlled substance is 5 years, he says, chewing. Louise blankets. In 5 years, her brother Jesse will be 16, practically grown. In 5 years, it will be too late. Oh, thank you, Rob. An avocado. But if you have information on the whereabouts of Barbara Van Laer, anything that will help us, we'll be in better position to help you too. Louise is looking at the table. If she looks up, she's afraid the tears she's been fighting off will be loosed. She'd rather be dead or jailed than let this man see her cry. Anyway, I can put a call in now, says Lowry. See about setting a bail hearing, but he checks his wristwatch theatrically. It's late in the day now. Magistrate might not be available till tomorrow. He walks out of the room. Louise is alone. For a time, she's quiet, letting this disaster descend onto her shoulders. Her first emotion is horror, that John Paul could have done something as evil as this. Her second is fear, that they'll believe him over her. One thing that's true, he's always had a mean, vindictive streak. She has seen this side of him, mainly with other boys at parties, when all of them were drunk and high. Only once has he ever turned that side on her. Oh, and here we go into Louise in winter of 1973, which I think is the first time we're seeing this. Winter 1973. Okay. It was her second winter at Garnet Hill Lodge. It was a Monday, a slow day anyway, and terrifically cold, which frightened off so many reservations that Louise's boss let her off early. So Louise, bored and lonely, took the opportunity to borrow a staff car and drive down to Union College. John Paul lived that year in a group house with several other boys, one of whom opened the door at the sound of Louise's knock. John Paul's out, he said, after taking a few beats to register her face. Oh, said Louise. From behind the boy, she heard the noise of what sounded like a party. A low, droning note was sounding over and over, a record skipping. A girl laughed merrily. The record was fixed. A boy roared. She recognized the roar. Stephen, she said. I think he's home. Inside, a dozen people stood or sat in small groups while Zeppelin played in the background. Most of them were girls she didn't know, young freshmen probably. They were dressed up, wearing going-out clothes, their hair washed and blow-dried. Where are they going on such a cold night, thought Louise, and then realized that this house was their destination, its residents their motive for taking such care with their appearance. Louise, in her parka and hat, felt like a friendly snowman. Across the room, John Paul swayed slightly, a sort of thrunk that made Louise's chest tighten. He had a beer in one hand and wore no shirt, despite the cold. The skin of his shoulders and chest was flushed pink. He had a beautiful thin build and a nice head of hair and very white teeth. And normally Louise thought him handsome, but the quickest way to make an attractive man ugly was to give him too much to drink. Drunk men frightened her. She had learned young how to coddle them, how to laugh just enough at their bad jokes to prevent them from feeling insulted, but not so much that her laughter egged them on. Coiled just below a surface of good humor lay their strength and their meanness, two guns waiting to go off. Louise, said John Paul when he spotted her. He lurched across the room, put his arms around her shoulders, leaned so heavily on her that the two of them almost toppled. Who are these people? She whispered. New friends, he said, slurring. You'll like 'em. Come on. But still, there was no introduction. And so, for a long time, Louise sat on a sofa with no drink in her hand, wearing a polo shirt with the Garnet Hill Lodge insignia, her goddamn work issued uniform, and watched as the people around her grew drunker, as the music got louder, as the atmosphere of potential sex got thicker and more obvious. The girls reminded her of something or someone, many someones, and with a jolt, she realized that it was her campers at Camp Emerson, not just in their richness and carriage, but also in their youth. The youngest looked 16 or 17 years old. Two of them began dancing with one another in a wobbly slither, and she watched John Paul watching them. And it was at that point that she took herself up to his bedroom without saying goodnight. She rarely smoked cigarettes, but she saw John Paul's on the bedside table and a silver lighter beside the pack, JPM monographed on its side, and she lit one and smoked it. She liked the warmth of it in her lungs. She put the lighter into her pocket. She wanted to take something of his. She put out the cigarette and lay there for a long time. There was a window next to the bed, and she looked out and saw that the moon was almost full. From below, she heard the music quiet, change to something calm. She didn't know what time it was. Louise woke up to the sound of the door slamming open. She sat straight up, clutching her heart. There was John Paul, a shadow in the doorway. Downstairs, people were still talking. "Where'd you go?" he said. His voice was low. She couldn't tell if he was more sober or more drunk than he'd been when she left. "To bed," she said. "Don't talk to me like I'm dumb," he said. One of his go-to phrases in any fight. He wasn't dumb. He needed everyone to know this. "Why didn't you say you were going?" Louise felt her anger rise up in her throat. Normally, she thought carefully about everything she said to John Paul before she said it. But tonight, she dropped her guard. "Don't want to get in your way," she said. "What did you say? Thought you'd have more fun without me?" John Paul closed the door behind him, throwing the room back into darkness. Suddenly, she couldn't see him. Something in Louise woke up enough to be scared. "John Paul," she said, and then his hands were on her, feeling for her roughly, pulling her up out of the bed by her clothing. "Who'd you fuck?" he said. His voice was too loud. She cringed. The voices downstairs stopped. They were listening. "Shh," she said, remembering too late that being shushed was one of John Paul's triggers. That telling him to lower his voice was worse than slapping him in the face. He had told her this in these words. "Don't shush me," he said. He shouted, "I asked you a question. Who did you fuck?" A tiny giggle from downstairs. No one," whispered Louise. Urgently, John Paul's grip on her collar was tightening. "You sure?" he said, "because I know you've got that in you. I've seen it." Once, thought Louise, one time. The first week they were together, her second month at Union, so drunk that she barely remembered, so drunk that it wasn't right. "John Paul," Louise said, "I went to bed. I was tired." He held her there for a few more seconds, breathing into her face. Then, slowly, he loosened his grip. He let his arms drop and took one stumbling step backward. Louise's eyes were adjusting. John Paul's glasses glinted in the streetlight coming in from outside. He put his hands on his waist, hung his head briefly, then pushed past her and collapsed into his bed diagonally, taking up too much space. There was no room for her. Louise looked at him. She didn't want to wake him, didn't want to raise his ire a second time. She could sleep on the floor, or she could go back out into the cold, get into her staff car, hope it started, hope a gas station was open at that time of night. She could make the drive back to the Garnet Hill Lodge. She could leave him behind forever. A small flame of rage was burning in her belly. I hope you die, she said to John Paul before she could stop herself. He was on her. His left hand grabbed her shirt. His right hand punched her twice. While she flailed with her arms, trying to protect her face, she kicked at him. She fell to the ground, curled into a ball there, protecting her head, trying to protect her stomach. He kicked her once, hard in the back. Don't cry out, she told herself. Don't cry. It was a sick instinct, one designed to sacrifice her body in the service of her pride. She could not bear the thought of those girls downstairs in their going out clothes, hearing her beaten. John Paul above her was panting. Say it again, he said. She was silent. She waited just long enough in her mind. She went through a checklist. Her car keys were on the table just inside the front door. Her purse was on the floor next to the bed, but she'd leave it. It was too hard to find in the dark. I hope you die, John Paul, said John Paul. Say it. She let out she let out a few more moments of silence go by and then tackled him around the knees with all her strength. She was smaller than he was, but she had the dual advantage of sobriety and gravity. She tackled him, and he hit the ground hard, and she jumped up, the pain in her face and her back unabating, and ran down the stairs. As she grabbed the keys on the table, she heard him thundering after her down the stairs. She sensed faces watching her from the living room. She did not turn. She flung open the door and almost died slipping on the icy stairs, but she righted herself. She got into the staff car and tried to start it. Once, twice, 3 times. It was very bad at starting in the cold. John Paul came out of the house and watched himself down the stairs, and it was the ice that saved her. Unlike Louise, he went down hard and stayed there. That's when the car started. That's when she backed out fast into the dark and empty street, and then threw the car into first, second, third, fourth. Her heart was still pounding. The gas gauge was at a quarter tank, maybe a little less. It would not be enough to get her back to the Garnet Hill Lodge. This much she knew, and her purse was back inside John Paul's bed. Both eyes were swelling, but the left one was worse. She rolled down her window and broke free from the top of the side mirror a small piece of the ice that had formed there. She held it against one eye, then the other. She had an eighth of a tank as she approached the exit for Shattuck. The Garnet Hill Lodge was another half hour up the thruway from there, and 45 minutes of local roads after that. She could go home, could sneak into her house and sneak out again in the early morning, and hope that Jessie and her mother would not see her and her mangled face. But if they did, she thought, if Jessie did, she took the exit. She had no choice. And then, waiting at the light at the bottom of the off ramp, she had an idea. She'd never been to the Van Layer Preserve in winter. She had no idea how plowed it would be. In the Adirondacks, snow accumulated fast and rarely melted, so that by March you could find yourself hip deep in places that weren't plowed by private service. But the family spent Christmas there, she had heard, and there had been no big snowfall since then. Sure enough, when she arrived at 2 in the morning, the entrance was clear. At the end of the driveway, the huge dark house sat dormant. She cut her headlights, waited until her eyes adjusted. No sign of anyone on the grounds. The moon was bright that night, and the snow reflected it broadly. It was easy to see, even at that hour. She got out of the car. She could not feel her feet by the time she entered Balsam. She felt, just inside the door, for the flashlight that sat on a ledge there all summer, and was glad when her fingers touched it. On her way past the commissary, she'd taken from the woodpile on its porch as many split logs as she could carry, as much kindling. Now she moved to the disused fireplace along one of the Balsam's walls, one of the few remainders of its history as a hunting cabin. She shone the flashlight up into the flue, which looked clean enough, and so she built a roaring fire using the lighter she had stolen from John Paul, praying that the kindling would catch. She dragged one of the cots as close to the fire as she could get without singeing herself. She took off her boots, her sodden socks, and placed them in front of it, and then put her feet there too, allowing them to roast. She lifted another thin and floppy mattress off another cot and put it on top of herself. She fell asleep there. For the second time that night, she was aroused from sleep. "Get up," said a voice. Louise was disoriented. In the warmth of the fire, her eyes had swollen, closed almost completely, and she could make out only a figure holding one object in each hand. One of them looked pistol-shaped. An outstretched arm was raising it in her direction. "Get up," said the voice a second time. The pain in her back and ribs made Louise move slowly, but at last she stood. The figure lowered its arm. "Louise Donahue," it said after a pause. Object in its other hand, a fire extinguisher, it turned out. It leveled a spray of foam at the flames for what felt like a very long time, until cold and dark had seeped back into the cabin, and Louise began shivering again. At some point during that minute spent in silence, Louise understood that this was T.J. Hewitt. "Thought you'd be smarter than to put a fire up a chimney this old," said T.J. "Could have burned the cabin down." "I didn't know you lived here all year," said Louise. "Where else would I live?" said T.J. "I guess I thought you lived in town," she said. "What town would that be?" Louise was silent. Shame was beginning to creep in, and regret. Already this was her favorite of all the jobs she'd ever had, and now she'd surely lose it. "Who did that to your face?" said T.J. Louise said nothing. She stood up, turned to face her boss, barely visible now in the absence of the fire. "Do you have any gasoline?" she said. In the director's cabin, T.J.'s actual house, Louise now understood. T.J. lit a proper fire. Its light and shadows flickered against the walls around it. T.J. had applied a cold stake to half her face, saying it would help the swelling. With her other eye, the open one, Louise now saw the cabin's history, the books on the bookshelves, novels and how-to guides, the pictures on the wood-paneled walls, fading prints of bears and birds and tranquil mornings on still lakes. On one wall, a map of the entire Adirondack Park. On another, a poster of animal tracks. TJ went to the small kitchen off the main room and stood before the stove, stirring a pot. Louise watched the back of her. She had a long braid that year that hung straight down her back. The rest of her was barely wider than the braid, but she was strong, no doubt about that. The muscles of her legs and arms were sharply on view all summer. Above her socks, below her t-shirt sleeves, Louise had seen her casually carrying a long wooden canoe above her head, a feat of strength that would have been difficult even for a man. She did have gasoline, TJ had said, but it was way up past the main house, and frankly, she was tired. She'd give Louise a place to sleep that night. They'd fix the car in the morning. Now she returned holding a bowl of soup in one hand and a glass of water in the other. She placed both on a low table in front of Louise, reached for the steak on Louise's face. She held it absent-mindedly in two hands, the juice of it dripping, and regarded Louise as she began to eat and drink. "What?" said Louise, who didn't ever like to be looked at closely, and certainly not with her face in this state. "Just thinking about whether you need to see a doctor." "I don't," said Louise. "Are your insides busted up? Did he kick you?" Louise paused, recognizing the trap. She could dodge it. Did who kick me? But certain that she was out of a job anyway, that she'd never see TJ again after this, she nodded. "He did," she said, "but I don't think anything's busted inside me. My face hurts worse." TJ nodded, returned to the kitchen to put the steak away. She approved of honesty, Louise knew. It was one of the subjects on which she expounded each summer at the start of session: honesty, integrity, vigilance. TJ nodded. Wait. Was it your boyfriend? TJ called over her shoulder. It was, said Louise. Want me to kill him? Said TJ, and Louise grinned and then flinched in pain. Abruptly, TJ walked down the hallway, and Louise wondered whether she was going to bed, but a moment later she returned, holding something out to her, a large photograph unframed. Louise had to hold her eye open with two fingers to inspect it. It was a photo of a group of people standing on the lake side of Self-Reliance, organized in 3 rows. In the front row, sitting, were children of various ages. Behind them were adults. Their expressions were joyful. The photographer had captured them in various stages of talking and laughing and turning. Only some of them were grinning at the camera. Louise turned the photograph over. On the back, written in black ink, "Black Fly Goodbye, 1961. She looked up at TJ, uncertain. TJ sat down next to her on the couch, regarded the photo alongside her. She pointed to a tall, slim girl, 12 or 13, standing at the edge of the second row. That's me, said TJ. I was about the age your campers are now. She pointed to the tall man next to her, who had a hand on her shoulder. That's my dad, she said. He looks nice, says Louise. Nice isn't the right word, said TJ, but he's good. Then she moved her finger down on the photograph to a boy of 10 or so, sitting cross-legged on the ground in the front row. He was blond and grinning impishly, one shoulder angled lower than the other. Recognize him, she said. Louise did, vaguely, but she didn't know why. That's your boyfriend, said TJ. Louise inclined her head, spread open the swollen eyelid. Her eye was tearing now. She was trying to find an angle that would let her see more clearly. Sure enough, that was John Paul. She had seen a picture of him at Dunwitty on the desk of his room at Union College. In the picture, he'd been standing with another boy. She had only asked him about it once, and he'd brushed it off. An old friend, he'd said. John Paul McClellan, said TJ now, pondering something. It sounded like remembering something unpleasant. How did you know it was my boyfriend? Louise asked. How did you think you got this job? TJ said. That quieted her for a bit. She didn't like to think of herself as someone with connections. Everything she'd ever gotten, she'd earned for herself until she met John Paul. I always hated him, said TJ. Wasn't my choice to hire you. It was the family's. Then she stood up abruptly and walked down the hall. Only this time she did not return. Louise set the picture on the low table in front of her. Thought for a bit. A moment later, she picked it up again. 1961, said the writing on the back. That would have been the year the Van Layer's son went missing. She inspected the picture more carefully. There were 12 people in the back row, 14 in the middle row, including TJ and her father, standing off to one side, and 10 children seated on the ground. On one side of John Paul was a girl who was most likely his sister, Marnie, a frown on her face, annoyed by something, the same expression she'd worn when Louise came to dinner. But on the other side of John Paul was something more interesting. A little boy was there, just a bit younger than John Paul, 8 or so. He was smiling broadly, had both arms in the air. A woman in the row behind him, his mother, Louise assumed, was clutching his hands and smiling down at him, her head lowered in his direction. She recognized him suddenly in 2 separate ways. This was the boy in the picture on John Paul's desk, an old friend, he had said. He would later tell her more, or he wouldn't tell her more. This was Bear Van Layer, the family's missing son, the subject of so many whispered stories at Camp Emerson. She had never seen a picture of him. The fire behind her crackled loudly, and then she jumped. In the morning, she woke to find the photo gone and her host holding out the telephone to her. "What time is it?" Louise asked. 10:30. You slept well. Shit, said Louise. Shit. She was due back at the Garnet Hill Lodge by noon. She still had the staff car, which had no gas in it. Louise jumped up, wincing. She began feeling for her boots. "Louise," said TJ calmly, "think a minute." "I gotta go," said Louise. "I gotta work." "What are you going to tell them when they see your face looking like that?" Louise paused. "I was night skiing and I ran into a tree." "Well, they're not going to let you work like that," said TJ, "and you shouldn't be driving with your eyes swollen shut. So you might as well call in with that excuse instead of delivering it live." Louise had never called out of work in her life. It was a point of pride to her. It was one of the things TJ sensed about her. She thought one of the reasons TJ liked her. "Go on," said TJ. "I give you permission." They were interrupted by a sudden coughing from down the hallway, loud enough to make Louise jump. "Oh," said TJ, "that's Dad. I should have told you he was here." "He lives with you," said Louise. Last summer, she had learned that the former director was still living, if deposed, but she had never once spotted him on the grounds. "He does," says TJ. Louise considered. "If I stay here and you go out," she said, "will he need anything from me?" "No," said TJ. "We got a pretty good system. I come back in once or twice a day to tend to him. He's fine on his own, otherwise doesn't need much." Louise said nothing. "You look scared," said TJ, grinning. "He's shy, but he doesn't bite." Louise stayed at TJ's for a week because TJ tended to her father only in his room, bringing him soft food on a tea tray and then returning 20 minutes later with an empty bowl. Louise intersected with Vic Hewitt only twice. The first time, she came out of the bathroom after a shower to find TJ emerging with her father from his room. Walking behind the old man, she supported him carefully, arms beneath armpits, hands clasped tightly at his front. Louise gasped before she could stop herself and then said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." There was something so intimate about the moment that Louise felt guilty for even seeing it. She put her head down. "You're all right," said TJ, "but get out of the way so I can bring him in there." And Louise backed into the other bedroom, allowing them to pass. She had barely seen his face. The first time had been accidental. The second time was intentional. After TJ went out one morning, Louise watched at the window until she was 100 yards away, a dark figure in the snow, and then she went still. From down the hallway, she thought she could hear low voices coming from Vic Hewitt's room. She walked down the hallway, holding her breath, making each footfall lighter than the last. Mr. Hewitt's door was closed, but not latched. She couldn't see the tiniest crack in it, and she put her face to it and then nudged the door open, little by little until she could see inside. Vic Hewitt lay on top of all the blankets, clad in corduroy pants and a sweater, his long feet bare. He was thin to the point of pain, very different from the tall, broad figure TJ had pointed to in the black and white photograph from early in the last decade. He looked up at the ceiling, blinking. The voices she had heard, Louise realized, were emanating from a large radio just to the right of his head. An announcer gave a call sign she recognized immediately. WNBZ out of Saranac Lake. It was the only radio station that reached the town of Shattuck. She nudged the door open an inch further, straining to hear the news, when suddenly Mr. Hewitt spoke. "Hello," he said to her, though he didn't turn his head. Louise had not thought he'd heard her. "Hello," she said. "Who are you?" "Louise," she said. Silence. "Do you need anything?" Louise asked, but he said nothing more, and at last Louise retreated. While TJ was out each day, Louise read the books on her shelves, many of which were how-to manuals and guides, but a number of which were classics of American and British literature, the kinds of books Louise had been assigned during her only year in college. She read Walden out of sheer boredom and found herself annoyed by Thoreau, his self-regard, his tone of superiority, the way he doled out advice so obvious as to be insulting. Here was a rich person playing, thought Louise. There were poor people far more resourceful and self-sufficient than he was. They just had the grace and self-awareness not to brag about it. Have you read this? She asked TJ upon her return. And when TJ nodded, she shared these feelings aloud. TJ was opening cabinets in the kitchen, reaching for pots and pans. Oh, said TJ, he wasn't as bad as all that, was he? But she was smiling, and Louise was convinced that she agreed. In the evenings, they played cards, Rummy 500, mainly, almost always in silence, until Louise got comfortable and restless enough to begin asking questions about TJ's life. Some of these TJ answered readily, others she dodged. Things TJ would not talk about included the Van Layers' children, the guests who came to visit the Van Layers. Things TJ was happy to talk about included the operation of Camp Emerson, her passion for hunting and fishing, building repair and maintenance, planting schedules, and, most of all, her father, about Vic Hewitt. TJ was happy to speak at length. She regaled Louise with stories of his smarts, his skillfulness, his quiet humor. Okay, I'm going to end it there for the night. We still got we got more than a few pages to go in this chapter. This is a longer one, I guess, this chapter. Because some of the chapters in this book are like a couple pages only. So, what did we learn tonight? Well, John Paul McClellan, her boy, Louise says, can we call him our fiance? Is it a fiance if you're the only one that thinks or knows like you're the fiance? You know? That he has like he's capable of violence against females. Also. Um um and I think that's important because I don't think everybody is, and he was, and also when he's been drinking. And so he had been drinking that night that he um got in the wrestle with Louise. He got ticked off because Louise was like, I wish you were dead. I wish you would die. Like, so she said something, so somebody could have said something to John Paul, like Barbara. He was already drinking, and there could be that. I'm just saying, like, do we have someone else we're leaning towards? Like, right now, it's like John Paul's looking more, but there's still so much of a way to go in the book that I don't know if I give it to you this quick. The family could be more involved. I don't know. By memory, I wanted to leave it there because I think from here in the next paragraph is going to talk more about Vic Hewitt, and I'm like, I want us to start there tomorrow because I want to really be ready to like think about what TJ is going to say about him. Learned 70s wife beating was a lot. Well, it was his girlfriend, but the 70s stuff. The oddest part that I'm not getting in all this is Alice. Like August 75, where she sees John Paul outside and he's running the business. Like, is Alice gone weird in her thoughts here? Because it's like, and where's Barbara? I don't know. We also, this part 5 is called Found. So maybe Barbara was found before then. And they're going to, in part 5, tell us. We'll see if that's tomorrow. So I have to be really bad. Hopefully, I'll get some more bags done tomorrow. Um, sorry, so much stress. But I had a lovely time reading to you. I love you very much. You're very sweet.